Hey, everybody. This is a conversation with myself and Tacticus today. The links to his YouTube channel are going to be in the description below, as well as his other social media that's there. Tacticus today, tell my audience a little bit about yourself and kind of what the conversation is going to be about today.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on your channel. As you can probably guess from my accent, I'm from down under along the east coast of Australia, and I've been doing this for about 12 months now. I guess you could say I've been an activist at a low level for a bit longer than that, but really it's been the last 12 months when I thought, well, hey, I feel like I better get up and say something and bring some information to the public about what's happening to Western society and how Western societies and white societies in particular are being emasculated, if not destroyed, by the globalists. And look, if anybody wants to change a society or they've got an idea, then they can take it to the people, fully and carefully explain their policies, and then the people can vote on it. And that's what we call democracy. And that's something that just hasn't been happening in my view. And it's something that we need to push back against. And we need to make sure that if there are any changes, such as the mass migration of third world illiterate peasants into the West, that is done and only done with the consent of the people. And that's been prime in my considerations, which is why I started the channel. But I noticed the descent into madness, which is Western society clown world today. I noticed it years ago as a business guy doing lots of travelling around the place. And I could see the beginnings of all these things in San Francisco as far back as the 1980s. But if we look back legislatively, we can see the demise of Western civilization has its seeds going back decades before, and we'll cover some of that in this conversation now. So, but that's a little bit about me and how I came to be doing it. It's my concern that Western society is being changed without the consent of the people, and that's simply unacceptable in my view. And we have to let as many people know as possible that it's just not acceptable, and we need to hold politicians who are pretty much owned by the globalists today. And again, we'll cover that a bit more, and make sure that we hold those people to account, and that any changes to our society is only done with the consent of those people, and which is us, of course, the Western voters. So that's a little bit about it. In terms of today, look. DDJ and I had a little chat about this before, but we're going to stay flexible and add things in and just follow the conversation where it leads. But one of the biggest problems or challenges, I guess, Western society faces is we're not reproducing anymore, and haven't been since probably the 1970s. We're just not the birth rates just aren't high enough. Families are disintegrating. Stay-at-home moms are being attacked from all sides. As you should be out working. What are you doing at home with the kids? And being a mom raising healthy kids for the next generation, that is one of the most important jobs in Western society. And the globalists and the people who want to destroy Western civilization, the family is one thing they particularly focus on. And so we're just not reproducing ourselves. But can any consumer society where everybody works and everybody consumes, can any consumer society reproduce itself? And this is one of the big questions, and something we're going to try and touch on today, and maybe have some answers. And hopefully our listeners are going to post their suggestions as well. How can we produce enough children in the West from the local population, the domestic population, to reproduce the next generation or create the next generation? And if we do bring in gazillions of illiterate brown peasants from the third world, will that help anything? Will it achieve anything, or will it simply further destroy and undermine our society? But the globalists would have it that we bring in all these people and all these brown illiterate peasants, and they're going to be consumers, and hey, who cares? But look, in their walled and gated communities, maybe they're going to be okay. I don't think so. I think they'll just be the last to be eaten. But for the rest of us, we have to put up with these policies that are undermining our society and our values, and even our reason for sort of getting up in the morning for many people. So let's talk a bit about that. And so that's a bit about me and the sort of things that we've VDJ and I have talked about, and yeah, what do we do about this undermining of Western society, and what practical solutions can we suggest?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you look at the Eastern Bloc, I believe it's Hungary. They've actually been trying to incentivize the birth rate in in that particular country. I think it was Hungary, and there might be a couple others. I don't really remember the specifics beyond. They've been trying to incentivize families to increase their birth rate. They've also been doing things like banning gender studies from their colleges. They've been preventing mass migration, and they've been instituting policies that promote basically just basic family values as opposed to promoting destroying the family. And so one of the things that obviously that I've spent a lot of time focusing on, both in my book and on this channel and on the many conversations I've had with others, is the idea that second wave feminism has done a lot to destroy society. Now, when I talk about second wave feminism, I don't talk about it in the context of a vacuum. I'm referring to it also as a symbiotic relationship to socialism and communism as well, because I don't believe that feminism can survive without socialism or communism. And I believe that socialism and communism are, for the most part, they're one and the same, in that their policies end up being, they end up having the same impact on society. So when we look at second wave feminism and we look at, for example, promotion of birth control, we look, for example, the promotion of abortion, we look for, the ideological teachings that the family is bad, that being a wife and a mother is somehow slavery. And feminists have done a fantastic job of redefining patriarchy from what the dictionary has basically defined it as for generations to this idea that patriarchy means the enslavement of women by men. So what they've done is they've kind of taken a chapter out of Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and they've blamed men for what they themselves are actually doing. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't talk about, because when anybody talks about the criticism of feminism, they say, well, here's the thing. If you oppose feminism, you must hate women. When the reality is that feminism is not a gender, it is a political ideology. And it's interesting because a lot of people have this conversation in the manosphere, and we talk about this idea of, being masculine and teaching red pill wisdom, teaching knowledge to have, to become healthy males, whether it's, traditional masculinity, whether it's the promotion of the family like the trad cons do, or whether it's, going your own way and avoiding relationships altogether. I think that the thing that's important is that a lot of these different teachings or these different tribes within the manosphere, they don't talk about the political piece. They I think it's like they hamstring themselves when they refuse to talk about politics, or when they actively avoid discussion of politics and the necessity of including politics in red pill ideologies and red pill teachings. And I don't care really what tribe the within the manosphere that these people belong to. The reality is that feminism is attacking men across the board. Socialism and communism are attacking healthy masculinity across the board. Healthy masculinity is demonized. And many men in Western society, well, not many anymore, but men in Western society exhibited healthy levels of masculinity. This was demonized. They called it toxic masculinity. They called it patriarchy. They called it a variety of other vitriolic names that basically targeted heterosexual men. Well, if you target heterosexual men and you destroy heterosexual men, you by definition reduce the birth rate of your societies. And the white nationalists, they often talk about, well, we need to make sure that we promote more white babies and this and this and that. Well, the reality is that a lot of these people from the white nationalist movement, they completely ignore feminism. And many within the white nationalist movement ignore the drama that's associated with socialism and communism. And they think that being part of the Nationalist Socialist Party or some incarnation thereof will help their cause. It won't. What will only help their cause is the promotion of healthy masculinity, the promotion of healthy femininity, as well as limited government. Because when Big Daddy government steps in, 9 times out of 10, it can't do what the private industry can do as efficiently as it can do it. Now, I'm not saying that there are no bad actors in private industry or anything like that. I'm just saying that when it comes to government and you look at socialist governments, every socialist and communist government in the history of the world has failed catastrophically. And on its way to failure, it often kills millions of people in the process. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're a nationalist socialist or whether or not you're an internationalist socialist, in other words, a communist. But I think that when it comes to birth rate, to kind of bring this full circle back around, we really have to, if we're to promote the birth rate in Western civilization, then by necessity, we have to oppose feminism and socialism and communism. Because really, it's those top-down ideologies that are really preventing people from having strong families. Because I'll tell you, in the 1960s and the 70s, and you bring up a really good point about a lot of this started in the 70s. Well, in the 1960s and the 1970s, feminism took over Western society. And they started promoting birth control. They started promoting abortion. They started demonizing men. They started promoting divorce rape culture. And all these men's lives got destroyed between the 70s and the 90s. So now, you get into the mid 2000s when Obama was president. All of a sudden now you have these ideologies that, for all intents and purposes, are promoted by science deniers. We have this idea that, our biological sex is determined by something other than our DNA, even though that's well settled biology amongst mammals for generations. And there's no new science. It's not like somebody from a tech industry is like, well, you know what? We're going to come in and we're going to disrupt science and we're just going to make some new shit up. Well, people have been making shit up, but there's no scientific basis for a lot of these things. But what these things serve to do, they serve to distract from the family. They serve to break the family apart by driving wedges, ideological wedges between parents and children. And they destroy this idea of having a healthy, replaceable birth rate. The other thing that I think that's important to really consider when we're talking about this, and I know I'm hitting a lot of subjects here and I kind of apologize, but the other thing that I think we need to consider too is that the feminist ideology promotes this idea of either being single or being a part of a nuclear family. The nuclear family is a lie. The nuclear family cannot subsist. So basically what they're saying is that we're either going to set you up for failure in a nuclear family, or what we're going to do is we're going to destroy your family by promoting being single. Now, why do I say that? It's because the extended family is something that we need to be promoting. This is something that I talked about a lot, and it's something that even people like Rollo Tomasi have adopted and other people in the manosphere have adopted. I'm the first one to actually bring up the idea of the extended family. The extended family is absolutely important. And if you want two prime examples of why the extended family is important, you need to look no further than former President Bill Clinton and former President Barack Obama. You see, a lot of feminists promote these two presidents as saying, look, these two presidents were raised by single mothers and they turned into presidents. So obviously single mothers are great. Well, that's a lie. And that's the thing about liars. Liars always lie and feminists lie all the time. The reality is this. Barack Obama's mother, Bill Clinton's mother, and you can look at the history books for this, they both abandoned their boys. They abandoned them. They decided that their life was more important than the life of their family, and they left their children in the care of their grandparents. The values that the grandparents instilled into Barack Obama and the values that were instilled into Bill Clinton, those were the values that made them successful in life. Now, I'm not saying, that these were the things that taught them to be criminals or crooked or dishonest or unethical or things like that. All I'm saying is that these are the things that got them through college. These are the things that kept them off the streets. These are the things that allowed them to create, a sustainable income as well as to be able to create families with children. So this idea that single motherhood is somehow a positive impact on society, it doesn't even pass the straight face test. The idea here is that we need to be promoting extended families and we need to be promoting multi-generational mentorship, not only amongst those families, but amongst the communities as well. So that's kind of my thought process so far, at least as far as where we're going. Tacticus today, what's your feedback on the many things that I brought up?
Oh, look, I agree. There's a whole lot in there to unpack, but just adding to some of that, the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin. If you look at Joseph Stalin's speeches, where they've got the English subtitles, he attends these women's empowerment conferences, and women's participation conferences and science medals for women ceremonies, and he's very, very big on feminism at the same time that he's murdering tens of millions of his fellow citizens and sending them off to gulags to die a slow death. So that's the face of feminism. It was a concept, certainly in the Soviet Union, to put everyone to work, but also to undermine this idea of men having any power in society, or certainly the workers. And just another point here, when we think, or the feminists or anyone thinks that this equal outcomes between genders and transgenders has been successfully put in place after 70 plus years of communism in the Soviet Union. When the communism finally collapsed in Russia, it was amazing, astonishing how quickly all that equal outcome stuff unravelled within months. Women were sex objects. The minorities that had been given all these cosy jobs and patted out in committees and so on, they were all gone. The whole thing suddenly unravelled ideologically as well as economically, and it was amazing how quickly that happened. And to the point where they were trying to get female recruits into the army. This is not long after communism collapsed, and trying to get female recruits into the army, and they decided that they would have beauty contests to select the candidates. So it went from one absurd extreme to another. But that just shows how quickly we think the ideology is deeply ingrained and that the propaganda is working. But in fact, there's a huge population of people that sullenly resent being dictated to and resent the propaganda being pushed at them. And as soon as the opportunity arises, they'll throw all that off, and all this so-called equal outcomes and these HR diversity officers, that'll all be swept away. And for me, it can't come too soon. Coming back to the feminist thing, in the 1930s and in the very early days of the FBI, they noticed that the Soviet Russia, the Soviet agitators who were infiltrating trade unions and academia and so on, they targeted the Western family as being the most important institution in the West, and particularly the United States and Great Britain, places like that. They targeted the family, and these agitators. If we destroy the family, the Western family, then we pretty much create a rudderless society that just drifts and meanders with no purpose, no focus, no intent. And they were pretty right, I think, in that assessment. And the FBI also made a list of the sort of people that these Soviet agitators would target in the West. And the list, which you can see today if you hunt for it, the list had on it gay lesbian community in the West, any black intellectuals, particularly academics, and particularly non-Gentiles. So if you get a non-Gentile academic, homosexual, and that was the trifecta, and they were the ones that were particularly sought out by the spies and the agitators in order to convert them to the communist message and to push the communist propaganda. And just going on from that, you've probably heard of Betty Friedan, who wrote, I think it was called The Feminist Mystique, a book in the 60s, which described marriage for women as a caged hell. Now, this has got to be put in some sort of context. In the 1960s, something like 65% of all American men could earn enough income, and their income would have enough purchasing power to be able to support a dependent wife and 2.4, I think it was, children. Now, that just gives you some idea of the affluence of the United States in those days. So to describe marriage as a caged hell was beyond absurd. It was the most affluent period possibly in human history, so much so that the wife could stay at home looking after the children and still have all the material comforts that even a couple of generations ago would have been out of reach. Now Betty Friedan was also a journalist for the communist Marxist Union newspaper, and I think an editor later on as well, and that was pushing that same anti-family family propaganda. So I'm surprised that Penguin, I think it was back in the 60s, would publish this blatant bit of communist propaganda and put it out. And then you had Germaine Greer and also in the United States, other Hester Eisenstein, Shulamith Firestein, and others, Kate Miller and I can't think of her name. Levine was another one. So there's a cluster of not all lesbian, but mostly lesbian, non-Gentile activists who were
kind of the army of the clam bake. Got it.
Well, yeah, and they were the nucleus of that 1970s feminist movement, and they came from New York to California. They're very active around California. Got Governor Ronald Reagan back in the day to sign the very first equal outcome divorce laws in California, because California had those communal ownership laws that the other states didn't have, and that's why the feminists always wanted to start the divorce law ball rolling in California. So they did quite well with that. Republican Governor Ronald Reagan signed the law not long after, gave that amnesty to the Mexicans living illegally in the United States. So the Republicans have been very much part, certainly in the early days, of this family destruction, the immigration thing, which is what has led us to today, where we can't sort of reproduce ourselves. So coming back to Viktor Orban and even Matteo Salvini in Italy is talking about this, that, hey, we need to stop bringing people into the country that just simply don't assimilate and don't want to assimilate. They're just coming for the free stuff, and they're being almost pushed in here by the globalist machine. And what we need to do is encourage the local citizens to do it. And in order to make that happen, to get local citizens to reproduce, there's got to be government incentives of varying degrees, but appreciating your earlier point of we don't want the government coming in too far because they'll probably fuck it up. But at least incentives there. But the main thing is to return purchasing power to the paycheck. Now, if we look at a middle class paycheck back in the 70s and look at it today, there's only 10% of income earners are capable of supporting a dependent wife and children with a decent standard of living in the West today, and it's even less in places like Italy, whereas it was over 60% in the 1970s. So it just shows you how much purchasing power has fallen and how that's a vital component of understanding why people are. Last bit, just before the last bit is the marriage contract.
You actually broke up there about 10 seconds ago. Can you go ahead and repeat what you just said? I apologize.
Okay, we need to look at the marriage contract as part of the equation. So the stopping the assault on men and the assault on Western society is the first one. The second one is restoring purchasing power to the Western paycheck. But this whole idea of supporting the family and supporting or encouraging people the local people in the West to procreate, this is a vital part. But this purchasing power thing is integral to understanding how we're going to turn it around. Because by having so many more women in the workforce, all it's done is by more than half reduce the purchasing power of the paycheck. Now, this isn't necessarily bad for consumerism overall, so the big businesses aren't necessarily concerned about this, but the implications for the family are devastating. If only 1 in 10 men makes enough money, or there are only jobs available for 1 in 10 men to make enough money to have any sort of dependent wife and children, as opposed to nearly 2/3 of society in the 1970s, then this is in itself a big issue that needs to be addressed to restore that purchasing power. And then the final component is the marriage contract. The marriage contract used to mean something. People couldn't just walk out on it years ago, and after the divorce laws that Ronald Reagan signed into law in California, now any woman or any woman can walk out of a relationship, and given that the man's in most times going to be the higher income earner, she can demand equal outcomes and take his income for years, decades into the future in some cases, so that the risk for a man in getting married as much as he's got no control over it, is much higher than someone coming into a marriage who earns a much lower income or has less drive and energy or less ambition or is more spendthrift or so on. So there needs to be that restoring the marriage contract to have some sort of validity, like any other contract or agreement between parties. So that's just some of my view. I hope that adds to the conversation.
No, I totally get it. Let me ask you this. I mean, obviously in the manosphere, we hear a lot of video content creators, a lot of bloggers and authors. When they talk about the manosphere and they talk about healthy masculinity, one of the things that everybody seems to shy away from rather, is the political piece, the political element. What is your view about men being politically active as one prong of the wheel to really restore a healthy society? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, some years ago, I wouldn't have agreed because our politicians are meant to represent all the people and the good of society. So do men or women or any group need to be specifically active? Then I don't believe so. But I think it's now reached a stage where there is a need for that sort of activism at some level. But I'm not sure how to press it. For example, we're a rule of law, or once were a rule of law society. So in the old days, when the neighbour would say, well, my next door neighbour's a witch, and they could drag that woman off to the courthouse, and she'd suffer all sorts of punishment, prove you're not a witch, that sort of thing. That sort of law is where we're at today. We've actually returned to that sort of law. Prove you're not a misogynist, or prove you're not a racist, or prove and we've actually returned pretty much to that sort of status of the medieval days of superstition. Whereas one of the things, and this is where I think particularly white men, straight white men with families need to be standing up for things like this, is to restore due legal process. Now, if you want to accuse anyone of being a racist or a Nazi or this, fine. You bring your evidence along in an independent court of law in front of an independent judge and jury, and you prove it. If you can't prove it, then you're going to have to pay a lot of money and damages and costs and so on. It's this sort of concept of law that we've lost. It's gradually sort of been frittered away through expediencies here and allowances there and equal outcomes somewhere else and affirmative action over there. And gradually it's been eroded. So I think one of the things that we need to do is restore due legal process, and so that cases like, and some may say that the ultimate recent example, public example of lack of due legal process is the Jussie Smollett case. As but one quite public example, or those Antifa dudes who are beating people up and they're getting 3-month good behaviour, that sort of stuff. We really need to restore, I think, that due legal process. In terms of other activism, then we need, I believe, we need to look at the party machines, the Democrat Party machine, the Republican Party machine, to make sure that the people that they're selecting aren't globalist flunkies or globalist shills, but people who represent the electorate, represent the people, and act on their behalf, not on the behalf of globalists. This may seem like a sort of semantics and fine-tuning, but I think this is where the whole thing came unstuck. It was these little things, bit by bit, we lost these things. Our political representatives no longer represent us, and some may even say, and I believe this is true, that our judges no longer discharge the law on the basis of due legal process, but rather on some ideological, fanciful concepts. Well, so we restore those things, and we've got a fighting chance.
Yeah, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, because, I mean, you saw in the 1980s when the Duluth model was created, and the Duluth model, for those who don't know, is the most commonly used domestic violence intervention program in the Western world. And those jurisdictions that don't use the Duluth model, they use a model that's based on it. And the interesting thing about the Duluth model, and you'll see this in a video, I believe I put it out in 2017, the Duluth model is built on fraud. It's based on fraud. Yet every judge, every prosecutor, every law enforcement officer in the Western world, they have to be trained in it. And the idea of the Duluth model is that men are always perpetrators and women are always victims. And nothing could be further from the truth. And the other thing is that in one of the founding principles in Western law is the idea of innocent until proven guilty. Yet, when it comes to social justice, it's guilty until proven innocent. And we see this all the time. We see these people getting tried in the press as opposed to before courts of law. And it's really a sad state of affairs because then everything degenerates into a publicity witch hunt. Like you look at, again, the Jussie Smollett case is a perfect example of that. This man falsely accused other people of committing a hate crime against him when the reality is that he staged the hate crime in order to gain sympathy and to demonize white people. It's a form of racism. And not only that, it's a form of national origin discrimination, which also is a violation of U.S. federal law, specifically U.S. federal civil rights law. And, this idea that if you are an American citizen in the United States, for example, and you support the Constitution, you support freedom of speech, you support the Second Amendment, you support due process under the law, and you wear a hat that says "Make America Great Again," people like that are getting targeted left and right. Jussie Smollett targeted everybody with his ideological attack. It was terrorism. It was terrorism. It was a hate crime. It was racism against white people. And that's the thing, is like when you look at civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King, one of the things he advocated for was for men and women to be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. But yet we have returned to this medieval witch hunt time where we are demonizing Caucasians. And we have other Caucasians that are attacking minorities because they commit the crime of wrongthink. I mean, let's give you another example. I believe Andy Go. I don't know the pronunciation.
Andy No,
Andy
the guy in Seattle.
Yeah, Andy No. So the guy in Portland. So he got a quick drying cement filled milkshake cup thrown at him. He got knocked down, and then he got gang beat, and he had a brain bleed. Now, he's a member of the LGBT community. He's a person of color, and he was covering some journalistic stuff that was going through. And so the concern that I have is that when it comes to these sorts of things, my biggest concern is this, is that the challenge here is going to be a scenario where now these white people are going to have to justify why this is not a hate crime. And again, it was Caucasians who assaulted him. So now we have what amounts to potentially racial extremism on the part of leftists against a person who is opposed to progressivism. And even the large organizations, large LGBT organizations, they've been victim blaming him. They're like, oh, well, you know what? He had it coming. Nobody has unprovoked violence coming. No one. I don't care what color your skin is or what your belief system is or whatever. If you're not committing violence against other people, and I mean actual violence, I don't mean like words or violence type of BS either. You do not deserve unprovoked violence. But that's the lengths that the progressives and the socialists and the communists and the feminists are willing to go to silence common sense opposition. We see this with YouTube. We see this with Google. We see this with Twitter, with Facebook. These people are openly working together. These organizations are working together in an antitrust capacity to silence people. We see the social credit system that was uncovered with Facebook. How much you want to bet the social credit system is being used by Twitch? It's being used by Amazon. It's being used by Twitter. It's being used by YouTube. YouTube and Google were working on Project Dragonfly for the Chinese government. How much you want to bet Facebook has access to that technology? I mean, the head of Patreon, he's running a social credit system. Their social credit system says that if you say anything related to hate speech on any platform anywhere on the internet and they find out, they can kick you off of Patreon. And there's no real appellate process for that. Now, in the United States, which is a little bit different than a lot of other countries, hate speech is not a thing. And there have been many times where hate speech has been challenged in federal courts, and the courts have repeatedly said hate speech does not exist when it comes to this sort of thing. So I think at the end of the day, the biggest challenges that we have is that for myself anyway, I believe that men have to be politically active, not necessarily walking around holding signs and protesting, but men have to vote. They have to educate themselves on the politicians. Maybe they go to some of these town halls and they start communicating with the people running for office, or they communicate with their elected officials. Because the reality is, in the United States, I think it's over 50% of our voting population does not vote. And I know that some countries have compulsory voting, but even the compulsory voting countries, they don't have a super large turnout for what you would imagine a compulsory voting country would have. So I think that when it comes to the politics of the manosphere, when it comes to a lot of this discrimination, I think we really need to take a page out of the feminist playbook. The feminists, they challenged a lot of laws in court. They challenged a lot of behaviors in court. They practiced lawfare, and this was top-down lawfare. They had law professors. They had all these different people doing these sorts of things. And then in addition to that, they had voter drives. They went out and they lobbied politicians to change their viewpoints and their perspectives. And now men are second-class citizens in many Western countries across the United States. There's at least one study out there that came out within the last 12 months. And I forget which video I did that I'd actually specifically talked about it, but that basically men are discriminated against more in the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, and Canada than women are. Women have far more opportunities. Yet when we talk about this idea of equality, we don't want to talk about how men are discriminated against and about how the game is rigged against men. And I always say this all the time, and I think it's important to repeat. There is no gender war, but there is a war on men and boys. And people don't understand it, and they're not willing to confront it because every aspect of society shames men. And I believe in equality of opportunity, but I also believe in equality of performance. If you're not willing to perform at the same level somebody else is, you should not get the same pay. If somebody else outperforms you legitimately, then they should be rewarded for that performance, or they should be, that performance should benefit them. But, if you're putting in 30% effort and this other person's putting in 100% effort, then no, you two shouldn't be given equal pay or equal benefits or equal opportunities beyond what you've earned. The idea is the equal opportunity idea is to get you on the playing field so you can earn your way. So that you can earn your way and your ability to move forward. But this idea that we're going to discriminate and target Caucasians or target men of all colors and say that that is somehow acceptable, that doesn't pass the straight face test either. And this idea that men should not be political, that's shooting yourself in the foot. Let me tell you something. The reason society is as fucked as it is today is because men have been told not to participate in the political process. Part of being a citizen of whatever Western country you're part of is being personally responsible and personally accountable for your system of government. And everybody else wants everyone else to save them from all the horrors that are there. But the reality is that everybody listening to this video, you are the hero you're looking for. You are the solution you're looking for. Not you, the individual, but you, the community of men, you, the community of society, you, the fraternity of men and boys in our society. Because if we don't start addressing these things and saying, look, we're not trying to demonize women, but we're done with women and manginas demonizing men. We want our birth rates to come back. The way we get our birth rates to come back is we start promoting family values and we start leveling common sense consequences for those who don't. Because when you destroy a family, you destroy a community. And when you destroy a community, you destroy a society. And when you destroy a society, you destroy a country. And if you don't believe me, look at Venezuela. Look at Soviet Russia. Look at old school communist China. Look at Sweden. Look at Europe. Look at all these places where mass migrants, illegal migrants, federal criminals in whatever country they're illegally migrating to. Look at how the illegal immigrants are treated better than the citizens. That should tell you all you need to know about the value systems of those people that are there. And I know a lot of people are like, well, maybe I'm a center leftist, or maybe I'm, not necessarily Republican, or I don't really want to vote Republican. I'm not sure what their policies are going to do. These policies sound good. Well, here's a fucking reality check. Look at dog shitistan, which is what I call California. Okay. Look at Seattle. Look at Washington State. Look at Oregon. Look at San Francisco. Look at Los Angeles. Look at Chicago. Look at Baltimore. Look at New York City. Look at London. Okay. All these places. Look at Melbourne in Australia. All these places have super high crime rates. They have lots of issues because they're very much social justice-y in the way that these jurisdictions are run. And they're being run into the ground. So this is what socialism brings. Socialism brings catastrophic failure and suffering, not only at all levels of government, but at all levels of society. And if we don't start looking at this in its totality, instead of looking at like one piece or two pieces here, what it's going to end up happening is we might solve one small symptom of socialism or feminism or communism. And there's 6 other symptoms we need to address that are festering like parasites on our communities. So with that said, I'm a very strong proponent of being politically active, of making sure that you vote, of making sure that you know what your political processes look like, and you participate within those processes. And I don't give a shit if you got to take the day off of work in order to vote. You're a goddamn adult. You're a citizen of your country. Do it. It's as simple as that. Because if you don't do it, your society is going to suffer in the trade. Now, with that said, Tacticus today, let's kind of shift gears a little bit. Talk to me about your concern about the birth rate, and if you had one solution that you would enact to address the birth rate, what would that be?
Oh, gee, it's probably tough to make a binary just one thing, but if it were one thing, I think restoring validity to the marriage contract, I think that would be the thing. You know, people can't walk in and out of things and take someone else's wealth with them. There has to be penalties for breaking the contract without reasonable due cause. So I think that would be probably the biggest one. But there are plenty of others that would feed into that situation. And just clarify, or just adding to your excellent roundup there, merit is something that the feminists and the socialists and the globalists fear above all else. Is something they're attempting to stamp out in every facet or area of our lives, unless it's merit in parroting the social justice mindless talking points. But merit is something they fear, and they're trying to eradicate it in business, in government, in schools and colleges, in order to create this equal outcome. And that's one thing they fear. If you look at the building blocks they need to create their socialist outcome or globalist outcome, the socialism is just like something they're putting up front. It's really the globalist outcome. Then merit is one of those key. But destroying the family, the mass migration, but merit is one of the key ones. And this is why they want Britain, the agitators and the globalists want Britain to stay in the European Union, because as soon as because the European Union is just a group of administrators dictating to the rest of the populace how they will live and by what rules they'll live, and what's considered of value and what's not, and so on. So that's why they want that. And as soon as they're out of that European Union, then the power starts to return to the people through the ballot box. And once you start doing that, then you have areas of merit coming in, and you're not able to emasculate the natural organic movements of society. And this is something that terrifies the globalists and the feminists and their various foot soldiers and hangers-on. So, and also coming back to how activist the feminists were, where did the money come from? Where did the money come from to do all that activism? How are they able to have these huge street marches back in the day? There's people there, there's canteens there dispensing food and water, there's people paying for hotel stays and all this sort of thing. A lot of money was shoveled into this movement to get all these changes made that they wanted, including a lot of money spent in California in the 60s. Now that money came from somewhere. And all the people that oppose men at the moment in the world globalist scene, they're all on someone's payroll. They're all paid to do that, whether it be the journalists or the academics or whoever. They're all paid to do that activism. And there's no downside for them. There's no penalty. They're not going to get thrown into prison or anything like that. But the men who oppose them or who question it or want to just say, hey, let's stop for a minute and talk about this, they're all doing it in their own time. No one's paying their salary or paying them to do it. And that's one of the uneven things. So that's why I think let's look at the building blocks the other side's using. Let's take away those building blocks, merit being one, and that's the way we'll start to strangle them off. Other than that, we need to be funded to the same extent that they are, or at least something similar, which means the body politic, our politicians, need to decide they're representing us and not the globalists, or that's my view at least.
Well, and I think that the other side, I mean, you hit on an extremely valid point. We have a lot of carpetbaggers and we have a lot of globalists that are trying to create these AstroTurf campaigns by funding from other countries, funding, from other jurisdictions, trying to fund these movements. And these are top-down targeted. And I agree with you. Even as far back as the 60s, who was paying for all this stuff? They tried to say it was grassroots, but the reality is the money had to come from somewhere. And it wasn't coming from the activists themselves. I think you touched on some extremely valid points. I do believe that this particular interview has been relatively content heavy. We're about 45 minutes in. I definitely want to continue our conversations together, maybe do a series of these conversations.
Sure, let's do it. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I think at this point, let's call this one at its end at this point, and then I'll go ahead and upload this for everybody to see. Again, everybody who's watching, this is Tacticus Today here with me, DDJ, on Misandry Today. And his links to his video channel and any social media he might have will be in the description of this video. Not only will this video be on YouTube, but it will also be simultaneously uploaded to bitshoot.com as well. So Tacticus Today, is there anything that you want to leave us on today before we go ahead and shut down the recording?
Well, look, I've really enjoyed it, and as you say, we've got a great body of work to cover, and we've covered a fair bit today. So let's certainly do a series. And again, all listeners and viewers, put your comments in, and maybe make some suggestions to some of the things you may like to see us cover in future videos. And yeah, let's do a series, and let's make it happen. I've quite enjoyed today, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
I did as well. And yeah, guys, if you're watching, you have any questions for myself or Tacticus today, definitely put them in the comments section. If you have any comments or feedback from anything you've heard today in this video, definitely throw it in the comments. Let us know what you think. And with that said, I'm DDJ, and this is your dose of Misandry Today. Take care.